Why they put it as the first full chapter of the Quran after Surah Al-Fatiha. When Adam alayhi salam repented to God, God said to Adam, get thee down from this place, paradise, but if as is sure there comes to you guidance from me, whosoever follows my guidance, on him shall be no fear, nor shall he ever grieve. That is as beautiful and comprehensive a statement of forgiveness from our Creator to His creation as has ever been recorded in history. First, guidance from me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took away the royal we that any king would use to describe himself. And the King of all kings, the Creator of all kings, took away the royal we and said me. If as is sure there comes to you guidance from me, which is personal and intensive and full of love, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had so much love for man that His promise to him was guidance would come from me directly because God loved man. And the other promise was that all men would get guidance and that anyone who followed this guidance would have a life without fear and a life without grief and a life without doubt. This is the promise of God to man. It shows that man was forgiven by God because God loved man. It was not, if as is sure there comes to you guidance from me, after you slaughter your children and pour their blood into an urn and drink it, now you'll be forgiven. Not suggesting that's Christianity, but simply giving you an extreme example. And the example is that God forgave man. That the rules that we follow, contrary to what your children may hear from angry, turbaned, bearded men, not to pick on them, the rules that God gives man are evidence of God's love for man. God doesn't need anything from us. But God gives us rules to protect us from ourselves. It's like if I said to you, you're standing on a rooftop, don't walk off the top of that roof because there is a thing called gravity. You could say I'm giving you a rule. I'm a dictator. I'm imposing something on you. I'm putting my views against yours. Or you could say that I don't want you to crack your skull when it hits the ground. When we as parents say to children, don't touch the fire, you could say that's a rule. You could say that's a regulation. You could say I'm limiting the child's freedom of action, possibly his freedom of speech and expression. Or you could say that I so loved my child that I didn't want his hand to burn off. And so it is that when we talk about rules, and when we talk about regulations, and when we talk about practices, these are not things that we do because God hates us, or God is mad at us, or we're mad at our kids, or our wives, or our parents. No. We have rules that we follow because God loves us, and we love God. We have rules that we follow amongst each other because we love each other. We shake each other's hands to show each other respect and equality. We allow the first person who comes into the mosque to sit at the front, regardless of whether he is homeless or whether he is a king, because we allow for the equality of man. We say that whether a man is black or white or blue or green, that he is equal in the eyes of God, not because we have a conspiracy to conquer the world, but because that is what God has told us, that it is the content of our character, what is in our heart, that will define how it is that we will be evaluated. We believe that we will die and that we will be judged, and we believe that that judgment is what puts limits on our ability to act out only in our own interest. It is the fear of being judged, that God is watching us even when other people can't, that makes us more sensitive to other people's needs, whether they're weaker than we are, whether they're orphans, whether they're women, whether they're minorities, or whether they, have any other sort of situation in this life that might give us a temporary advantage over them. We come to Islam, and Islam was brought because of a magnificent vision. And that is the vision that God has for man. That man is something different from other forms of creation. That man could be so much more than an animal with a heavier brain. Today, there are many people who follow no religious belief. Today, these people say they have no religion. In fact, they do have a religion. They have the religion of nafs. They have the religion that says that they alone can decide what is right for them. Or perhaps a group of them can decide what is right. Today, men can decide all kinds of things. Men can decide that it's okay that poor people stay poor, that sick people don't get health care, that men can marry other men. Men can decide anything that they want, but that doesn't necessarily make it right. And these are uncomfortable things to say in North America. These are uncomfortable things to say, but we can say them without bombing people's houses, without cutting their heads off, without threatening their life and their liberty and their property. That's cartoon Islam. We can say that there's another way to live, and that way is for people to be more fair, more loving, more kind, more just, more true to who God wants us to be. And if we say those things, here's the second part, and the harder part, and we live those things, you find that cartoon Islam will die. Islam spread because one man said those things, but much more importantly, one man lived those things. One man, although he came from a wealthy clan, took issue with the way the clan lent money. In Arabia at the time, it was possible for people to charge endless rates of interest, 72% interest on a loan, which guaranteed that poor people got poorer and rich people got richer. And the person who spoke out against this was not a poor person, but a rich person, who could have been rich anyway. It was Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The people that turned this on its head were some of the richest and wealthiest merchants in Arabia. Uthman bin Affan was an unbelievably wealthy person at his time. Abu Bakr Siddiq was successful. Umar bin Khattab was successful. But these people feared God. The vision that God gave them of how life should be, a brotherhood of man, where the strong protect the weak, and the weak have something to offer the strong. Perhaps it's intelligence, perhaps it's guidance, perhaps it's wisdom, perhaps it's a reminder of what we all will face on the Day of Judgment. Could be anything. Made all humanity precious, all life sacred, everybody important. And so it was that the wealthy turned their back on things that would make them even more wealthy, and yet the whole society prospered. So it was that the poor turned their back on things that originally they were offered. Abu Dhar, as we know, came from a tribe which was very poor and which used to rob people on the highways. That tribe turned away from what it did, just as the rich turned away from what they did. Why? Because of the brotherhood of man that was espoused by Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We do not believe that we as individuals are chosen or special or superior to anybody. We do believe that the way of life that we have been given is. And for that we do not apologize. It is not arrogant of me to say that the way of life I have been handed is the best way for all mankind to live. It would be arrogant of me to say that I live that life perfectly, there being a vast difference between the two. All of us spend our lives with this deen, fumbling towards God, fumbling to try to be better than we were tomorrow than we were today. Because we have the vision, we have the blueprint, but we have to talk about it. We have to tell our children about it. And we have to live it in such a way that it provides a counterexample to people who are today without vision and without hope. And this indeed is the greatest single lie that has ever been directed against Islam, and it's never been said quite the way I'm going to say it. The impression you get, both from cartoon Islam and even from apologetic Islam, is that Muslims are people who are not supposed to have any hope. The greatest single enemy that each of us faces is not the government of the United States. It's not the government of Israel or Russia or China. It's not even our own governments, although we could spend hours talking about them. The greatest single enemy that we face is the idea that we don't matter, that we can't achieve anything, that our life is going to be exactly the same tomorrow as it is today, and that nothing we do is going to change it. That large, powerful, historical, economic, social, geographic, cultural, heck, even the weather, are all forces that are going to consign us to live each day as it was yesterday. That is our greatest enemy. You could call it complacency, you could call it fear, you could call it laziness, you could call it doubt. And it is no accident that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised Adam alayhi salam a life without fear and a life without doubt. Because those are the two greatest enemies of man. When Prophet Abraham came to his people and he said, "Why do you worship idols that cannot help you?" And their response was, "Because this is what we found our fathers doing." Laden in that answer are two things: doubt, that there could be any way other than the way of your fathers, however insane it was, and fear. Well, what would you have us do? It's unknown. But fear and doubt are exactly what confined people to live like animals. If fear and doubt ruled Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would never have confronted the Quraysh. He would have doubted, how could I go to the wealthiest tribe in Arabia and tell them they got to change what made them money? How do I go to people who bury their daughters in the sand and tell them they have to respect women's rights? How do I go to people who think black people are slaves and get them to pray behind somebody who's black? How do I do that? If fear and doubt were what ruled him, none of these things that today we see as obvious would have happened. But fear and doubt are not what rule a man who loves God. Because God who loves man has promised him a life without fear and without doubt, so long as he follows the guidance of God. Ours is a religion that is bent on defending a dream that cannot die. Ours is a religion that is bent on the idea that mankind can make of himself something much more than he was originally born to be. He can make of himself something almost superhuman. When you look at what Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam achieved, it goes far beyond what an alien would call a Superman. A man sat in the middle of the desert and changed the way people lived for 1,400 years. A man spoke in Arabic, a language which most Muslim people still don't speak. And every day, 5 times a day, they pray in a language that they don't speak. They recite long passages of ancient Arabic poetry. And they don't speak the original language. If I came to you and said, okay, each of us is going to leave within a week and learn the poetry, ancient Chinese poetry from 1400 years ago, and the best people to recite this poetry won't be Chinese. In fact, Chinese people will cry when people from Africa or Pakistan or Afghanistan recite their words in their language. You would look at me as though I had swallowed something strange on my way to this sermon. If I said, you know what, we're all going to learn Laotian. No offense to anybody from Laos, I'm sure it's a beautiful country. But we're all going to learn Laotian. Not even modern Laotian. We're going to learn Laotian, language of Laos, from 1400 years ago. And we're going to pronounce it exactly as they did, and we're going to study it and memorize it and implement it in all our lives. You would say to me, what are you, an archaeologist? Spend too much time watching the Discovery Channel? Get with it, man. And yet that is what happens for over 1.5 billion people every day. 1.5 billion people every day pray to a God in a language that isn't their native language. 1.5 billion people deny themselves food and water in the hottest countries in the world because of what they were taught by somebody